Hello everybody and welcome to Mabavtober. I'm trying to think of like cute little names for each year where I subsequently decide to rant about My Babysitter's a Vampire, because this is another one of those years, yay! Remember how I said in that other Mabav video of mine, like, I think I've said everything I have to say about Mabav. I was wrong. Welcome to Mabavtober, where for once a week I will upload a video about Mabav. Hopefully, we'll see if I can get my act together and actually consistently do that. I have a lot of plans. I've been working really hard on this, and it's something I'm very excited to do. So yeah, let's talk about Mabav. Specifically, I want to talk about the characters in depth. Famously, I made a video about My Babysitter's a Vampire all the way back in 2023, and I called it a deep dive into My Babysitter's a Vampire, and it was 2.5 hours long. And I still don't think that was long enough to talk about this series, specifically the character analysis sections. While I still agree with everything I said, there's a lot more there to kind of parse through. So because of that, we're gonna make a video for each character. So welcome to the Weir video, if that wasn't obvious already. This is probably gonna be one of my most controversial videos, if not my most controversial video, just because I know for a fact that a lot of people are gonna be really mad with what I have to say, which, I mean, fair enough. Everyone's entitled to their opinions, and my opinion happens to be that the character of Weir is, to use a video essay modern day term, problematic. Specifically, I don't think I've done my due diligence properly analyzing and getting into the weeds of things that were problematic about the series, mainly because I'm scared. I'm scared of people being mad at me, and I don't like talking about serious issues, famously. I like to be a relatively lighthearted channel here, but I think we need to get into some more serious, deeper topics. So today we're going to be talking about Weir, and more specifically, the things that have aged quite awkwardly about his character, and really kind of dive into what I mean by that. More specifically, I think a lot of the comic relief side characters in these early 2010s children's TV shows represent a lot of chauvinistic behavior and relatively, like, sexist attitudes towards women specifically, and they all do so under the guise that it is satire and satirical and a farce, when in reality they don't do the actual work to make it a real satire. And also, does satire even work in a genre like a kid's TV show? Like, is that even a place you can be satirical in? This is a deep thing that I've been thinking a lot about, and when I applied it to Weir, it just broke my brain. So yeah, we're here to talk about it. Let's get into it, y'all. First thing I want to make very clear before I get into my, personal sponsorships and such, and that is that I am not really going to actually be touching on incel culture and the Manosphere in this video. I'm sorry you've been clickbaited. My reasoning for that is because, I don't want to do research into that. I don't want to have to look up the Manosphere and learn about it. And also, I don't want to get comments from incels on my channel. Although, there's two likely things. The first possible situation is that not a single person who is an incel or is part of the Manosphere or whatever you call it, like, is gonna watch this video, because it's gonna be very clearly, like, very video essay-y, and I don't know if they interact with that stuff. And the second option is that they love to interact with anything that mentions their name, and I will get hate comments from people for me even bothering to question their ideology and behavior. And I guess I'll just have to deal with either one. But I guess what I'm mainly, interested in and looking at is the fact that a large swath of masculine-leaning people have really pushed away from, the Me Too movement, respecting women, feminism, all that stuff, and have just really gone full throttle into misogyny and sexism. Misogyny, I'll say it, yeah. Full-on misogyny. And a big part of my brain wonders if the shows that we watched as children affected that in any way, and if that's even something that children's TV shows and sitcoms as a whole can do. we'll talk about it. We'll discuss it. One thing I really want to hype up and mention is the fact that we're also going to be doing a Mabavtober style thing on the podcast, the Vampy Wampy Campy podcast. For those who don't know, the Vampy Wampy Campy podcast is still going, but on its own channel on YouTube. So feel free to check it out if you haven't seen that channel yet. If you're wondering where the podcast went, because it used to be hosted on this channel, it now has its own dedicated channel, and we will be doing the same thing where we talk about Mabav and upload a new episode of the podcast once a week. And on Halloween, if everything goes right, we're going to be reviewing the Halloween episode of Gravity Falls, because if you don't know, right now we're reviewing every episode of Gravity Falls because we finished Mabav, because famously Mabav doesn't have that many episodes. So yes, go check that out if you haven't yet. Okay, I'm so excited. We got some really good stuff coming for the podcast. So I'm feeding you guys this month, okay? Eat up. Secondly, do you notice this cool bracelet I'm wearing? I make them now. I make them. You can buy them on my store. I am famously horrible mentioning the fact that I have a merch store. Like, I have a merch store. For a year now, I've had a merch store, and I have basically not advertised it that well in any of my videos. So yes, please go check out my merch store. I'm going to be selling character-specific bracelets with their names and without their names, with these really cool, like, eclectic charms. I'll put a picture of it because it's probably not in focus on camera. But they're really cool, and I'm really proud of it, and yeah, I mean, it's a great way to support the channel, because I don't know if I should ever do, like, memberships or a Patreon or whatever. You guys can let me know about that in the comments below, but this is a great way to support me, because I have so much fun making them, and I hand make everything. Everything's a pretty good price, in my opinion. I try to keep my prices low, especially these days, right? So yeah, go check it out. It's shopify.com/comicbookddr or something like that. I'll have it linked in the description for sure. And with that, let's get into Benny Weir. What you were here for, what you're here to watch. So I want to preface with the fact that the character of Benny Weir is, at least was, and probably still is, very well beloved within the My Babysitter's a Vampire fandom, and is probably the first character that comes to most people's minds when they think about the show. And that is because he is a very memorable character by design. He is the comic relief side character. So because of that, he gets all of the most memorable one-liners, all of the funny things. Ethan, especially, and Sarah have to, like, be serious and problem solve, whereas he can just be funny in the background. And that's very endearing to people, and they really appreciate that in a character.
It's gardening time.
Is that the best you can do?
Pretty much.
So because of that, he was the most popular for the longest time. I would argue in 2022, when the allegations about Atticus Mitchell came out, that's when really things started to shift a bit. If you don't know about that, then please go watch my previous video on My Babysitter's a Vampire. I will also link it in the description. It, at the very end, details the allegations against Atticus Mitchell, which are horrendous, and I'm not going to mention it all in this video because we're talking about the fictional character that he happened to play on that show. A lot of criticism that I get specifically when I say that I don't like the character of Benny Weir, or I think that he's problematic or whatever, is that, like, well, you're just saying that because you don't like the actor. And no. Both of these things can be true at the same time. Famously, when my original Mabav video came out, I was writing the Benny Weir section when the allegations came out, because I started on that video in October of 2022. So, and I think the allegations came out around November. So I was already writing about how I wasn't that big of a fan of Benny, and how I thought he's a very great character to watch on screen, but he's extremely, like, controversial with his behavior. I was writing that as the allegations came out. So this was something that I believed in way back, ever since watching the show as a grown-up. Even on the podcast, when we were first reviewing episodes in February of 2022, we were talking about how we think he's a horrible person, and we love watching the show because of that. And that's also what I want to preface, is that we need to use our discernment when watching shows like this, okay? Shout out to Khadijah and Bo. R.I.P. to a legend. I meant to do the heart hands, but I was holding my mug. Here, heart hands. R.I.P. to a legend. That was the word of 2025 or whatever in their videos. Great stuff. Yeah, like, I'm going to say it multiple times throughout this video, but yes, we need to use our discernment when watching these shows as grown-ups, okay? Because I'm assuming you're all grown-ups. Are any of you guys children out there? let me know, I guess. No, actually don't. Oh my god. So the audience is already intensely endeared to the character of Benny because we find him funny and he's making silly jokes while everyone else is being serious, right? And then something weird happens early on in the movie, which is like the pilot episode of the series. I'm assuming everyone who's watching this has seen the show, but I don't know, I should give context just in case. Early on, these characters are freshmen in high school. They're going to their first day of freshman year at high school. So they're like 14, 15 years old. And the first thing that this character does when he enters the hallowed halls is catcall a girl.
On the positive side, one of these primo high school babes could totally be at your house tonight. Hey, hot stuff. Dude, what?
Ethan reacts negatively in this scene, but he won't really do so further on along with all the other characters, which is an example of how this kind of behavior is so heavily normalized. The fact that it even slipped into the show is proof of this, that it was just something that's normal, because what reason do we have to make the character of Benny a catcaller who is obsessed with women? I understand the fact that he's constantly wanting to date a girl is a core aspect of his character, and is all of this is supposed to make him seem lame and weird and not cool.
Hey, you want to go out? I've got the David Stokowski seal of approval.
Drop dead.
Oh, see? She spoke to me. That never happened pre-headlock.
We're supposed to understand that the main boys, Ethan, Benny, and Rory, are nerds and lame and at the bottom of the food chain. And the proof of this is that he doesn't get the girls, right?
And that is why I'm no longer welcome at the bowling alley. You know, I think you're really interesting. Do you want to talk about yourself for a bit?
But we don't need to show that through the fact that he's catcalling them in the hallways and calling them babes and other terms that a lot of people have said that they do not like being associated with women multiple times throughout the series.
Hey, sup, potty?
Benny as a character is deeply obsessed with women. In the season 1 premiere episode, Lawn of the Dead, he has a huge crush on this character Della, who is essentially the same character from the movie that he actually kisses in the movie. He really wants to date Della, and so how he decides to do so is revive her dead dog. The show is unhinged, and again, all of this as a grown-up, I'm understanding as something that is weird and bad, and I'm entertained by it. I'm entertained by the fact that this brain-dead 15-year-old who is so obsessed with dating this girl that he's like, I gotta do necromancy. Is it necromancy when it's a dog and not a human? I don't know. But he's like, I'm gonna revive the dead.
She didn't even say thank you. Oh.
Like, that is very funny to me. But is that something I want to see somebody, and obviously it's like, I was gonna say, like, is this something I want to see someone reflect in their own behavior? But like, how can that be reflected? It's not like someone's gonna revive their crush's dead dog, right? And this is why Mabav gets away with it for the most part, because it is applied to such absurd situations.
Our courtship is on hold. At least until she gets out of counseling.
Oh, I forgot my resources. I gotta get up and get my resources. Why did I leave them on the other side of my room? So when this unwanted behavior is not reflected positively in his face, like he's expecting it to, he reacts negatively. The purest example of this is Smells Like Trouble, which is the episode where Benny poisons his fellow classmates. That's the word I'm going to use, because he puts them under a love potion spell with a cologne that he charmed, and he spills it, and it gets in the vents, and every single girl falls in love with him and Ethan. This is an insane episode, and Benny is literally the villain in this episode. Like, point blank, he is the antagonist of this episode. Throughout the episode, they try and frame the women who have gone feral over the fact that they have been love charmed to be the villains, but like obviously it's Benny because he's the one who put them under the charm in the first place. What's horrible about this episode is how they prop up essentially the two main ships of the series, which is something we're going to talk about in the Vampy podcast. Please check that out. We did a whole extremely long episode where we talked about all of the ships. Even though people don't want to agree with me when it comes to Benny and Erica, they're, as far as I'm aware, one of the only ships that is like in canon explored to a certain degree. Obviously, Seraphin or Ethera is the biggest one that's explored, and when we get to talking about Ethan, we'll talk about it. Don't you worry, okay? But other than what the series would deem joke ships like Rorica with Rory and Erica, Benica is the only other ship that is like seriously considered throughout the series. The straight ships, obviously, you know, well, it was 2011, okay? They want this ship to be taken seriously, and they have it in the series, and it involves a non-consensual romantic situation between the two of them. And I'm calling it non-consensual because Erica is under a love spell. Even though she's the one who kisses him, I would call that pretty definitively non-consensual, okay? If people want to disagree with me, I'm like, all right, weird, okay.
Erica kissed you. Of her own free will. I know.
And I would argue that this is an example of him reacting negatively and aggressively towards the fact that he is not getting the attention he wants from girls because they are rejecting his very already creepy, offstandish advances, right? What do we call this, people? We call this incel behavior. These are what incels are, right? Am I wrong? Even if there's not a modern word we can assign to what this character is doing, it is definitely a bad thing that he's doing. And again, as a grown-up, it's fun to watch. It's funny, okay? Smells Like Trouble isn't funny. That's one of my least favorite episodes, if not my least favorite episode for that exact reason. But for a lot of the show, what the guy does is funny. I think it's funny when he tries hitting on those girls and they shove a bunch of Cheetos up his nose. Like, that was a good fun time to me.
Ladies.
And one could say that all of that reaction, the girls throughout the show constantly rejecting him, is the example of this behavior not being normalized, right? That's where the satire comes into play. Well, here's the thing about that, okay? That's what I said on our podcast all those years ago, I'm pretty sure, was that, well, the show agrees that it's bad because he never gets the girl. He never wins, right? Because that would normalize and say that the behavior was okay. Like, this is what you need to do to get a girl, right? And the show doesn't do that. At least this show doesn't do that.
You have to act like me. Girls love the whole bad boy thing I've got going on. I choose to believe girls respond to charm and sensitivity, and you really are the sister I never wanted.
I want to talk about Zach Martin for a second, okay? Listen, clearly I have a lot to say about The Sweet Life on Deck. Another promotional thing that I should have mentioned at the beginning of the video, but I couldn't segue well enough, is that I kind of have like a little limited series sort of podcast thing on my second channel called the School on a Boat podcast, where I just ramble and rant and rave about The Sweet Life on Deck because one 2-hour video apparently wasn't enough. So yes, please go check that out. I haven't gotten around to talking about Zach Martin yet specifically because I've been absolutely deconstructing the hell out of the Cody Bailey relationship, but I want to talk about Zach Martin because these characters are like twin flames, I swear. They both exemplify this specific behavior. This is where my notes come into play. So Zach Martin is another example of a character who has an interesting relationship with women. His whole thing is that he constantly wants to date women and is constantly thinking about them, specifically in The Sweet Life on Deck, because the character evolves a lot throughout the series. He starts as like a 12-year-old in The Sweet Life of Zack and Cody, right? He's a twin to Cody Martin. You guys know that already. And yes, a lot of the material that is given to the character of Zack revolves around his constant revolving door of girls and dates that he's going on. He has his black book and everything that he flips through and...
Let's see. Tall blondes? Bodacious brunettes? Spunky redheads? Here we go. Pity dates.
When he finally does get a girlfriend and she asks him, how many girls have you dated? He, like, doesn't remember, first of all, and the fact he's like 17 at this point, I think, so that must mean it's been a lot.
Truth or dare?
Truth.
How many girls did you date before me?
Dare. Starting with A, Erilyn, Abigail,
Abyssinia, Adelaide, the other Adelaide, Tiffany, that's a T, yes, but she was a fox. Audrey, Ava, Azalea. Azizika?
Azizika? Are you ever gonna get to the bees?
It's funny, okay? I find it funny. Because the character essentially just becomes Disney Channel's Barney Stinson. This was something I argued in my original video about The Sweet Life on Deck. And it's funny, but why is it funny? Why is it funny that Zach Martin pulls? I hate using modern terms. I'm never saying that again. I think the reason why it's funny is because it's already expected. It is so heavily already understood that this is something a cool character would do, and Zach is supposed to be the cool one, whereas Cody is the nerdy one. So it's the fact that this is expected for a cool character, and then the bit is heightened to an extreme degree, to make it funny. That is itself what the problem is. I read chapter 15 of the book Queer Media Images, LGBT Perspectives, specifically chapter 15, written by Kenney, hope I'm pronouncing that right, titled The Play's the Thing, Representations of Heteronormative Sexuality in a Popular Children's TV Sitcom. This chapter doesn't really pertain that much to my discussion here today. I'm only going to touch on it lightly, but I am going to review the whole thing in my podcast on The Sweet Life on Deck, the School on a Boat podcast, I think. I'm planning on it, if people aren't extremely bored by that. But one of the big things that this chapter touches on is how society regards sexuality as a generally inappropriate topic for children, yet heterosexuality is extremely well presented and well represented in these shows, and yet homosexuality is not, when apparently the concept of sexuality in general is already no-go for kids shows, right? It's a great double standard to point out, I think. It uses The Sweet Life on Deck as an example, specifically season 3. Was this written for me? Considering the role of media as a socializing agent, it is of critical sociological importance to understand the content of media produced for young audiences. It is important for scholars to critique which moral and normative messages are present in TV programming and how socially relevant information is effectively communicated. Youth-geared TV shows can be especially powerful tools for communicating a society's values. Analyzing the content of media products for children provides insight into the values and roles they are socialized into understanding. The very values and roles generally assumed to develop naturally from characteristics inherently bound up in sex and essential gender differences. The chapter then goes on to analyze how the mass ritual of television, and television being in everyone's homes, at least at the time this was written in 2013, as an example of mainstreaming. How these shows, because they are such important pillars of American society, or at least they were at the time that this show we're talking about was made, it is a form of mainstreaming the ideals that is put within the shows, whether intentional or not. Then do a bunch of analysis on all of the episodes of The Sweet Life on Deck that have made me go insane, but due to heterosexuality's privileged and deeply embedded position in society, it was valued and promoted as not one representation of sexual identity, but the representation of appropriate sexual identity. And even though Mabav is a bunch of, monsters and vampires and stuff that it has to deal with, I would argue it's a lot of the same. But see, here's where we get into fan theories and headcanons, because famously, the character of both Zach Martin and Benny Weir are heavily headcanoned as being comphet, or compulsively heterosexual. With Zach Martin specifically, I can see where this comes about because it doesn't even seem like he really likes girls all that much. It is more about the competition and the hunt, the chase. And usually when that's the case, that means that they don't actually like women. They just are doing it for male or societal validation. When it comes to Benny, though, the thing about this that makes it really, really fascinating and interesting is Betty. Betty Weir, as we know, is the character's cheerleader persona, trans identity, I don't know. So much of the fandom has headcanoned Benny as a trans femme character because of how exuberantly joyful the character is while in drag. And again, using our discernment here, okay? As much as I love this, and this is a fan theory that I actively participate in because I think it is generally just like a very good time. We all know why the character of Benny liked being a woman so much in the show, right? Again, it is another example of them making fun of the fact of men in dresses. Like, haha, isn't men in dresses wearing makeup funny? Right? That's the whole reason why that scene and that whole plotline exists in episode 2 of the series. As I've said in my video on the queer implications of My Babysitter's a Vampire, again, I talk about this series all the time, man. I got so many videos to recommend to y'all throughout this series. As I said in that video, not only does headcanoning Benny as a trans woman like a really cool thing in general because it's awesome, it also fixes all of these problems about Benny, all of this constant weird energy towards women and how he interacts with all of the girls in his school. It can all just be basically like swept away as gender dysphoria and sexuality, like confusion in sexuality. I also do not in any way intend to imply that this is some sort of holistic trans experience before actually transitioning. That is not what I intended at all, and I realized I wasn't super clear on it specifically. And also, this is all, within fan speculation and a little bit of, just fandom stuff that we do over here on the internet. The fact that the actual show itself has all of these essentially anti-trans jokes, even if the writers themselves didn't realize that they were anti-trans jokes, was mainly what I wanted to highlight, and how people have taken that to their own personal opinions to agree that the character is trans. I like that personally, but also I think instead of doing that, we should be liking more shows with actual trans people in them. Also, they should be making more of those, because there's not that many out there to begin with. But anyways, but we know where the origin of the jokes are from. This was something I think I kind of touched on in that Queer Implications video, but yeah, like, we all know as grown-ups here that it was wrong for them to make fun of gay and trans people. So I bring this up to further show and highlight how things that were intended as jokes by the writers were actually taken literally by the most often younger audiences that were watching, and in this case spun it into something positive for themselves, like feeling represented in the way certain emotions are being portrayed within this character, and how he can find joy in changing his identity. Now you can see how this can be taken in the opposite direction, right? Here's proof of mean-spirited gay jokes specifically, which can be seen as satire on how a leading man ought to be, more on this when I get to talking about Ethan one day, being taken not as jokes, but as the sincere truth, and becoming representation for the characters and possibly being a place of reference for future behavior for themselves. I literally see trans men all the time recreating Ethan's fits on my online feeds, and I love it. It's amazing. But what about the more negative aspects of Benny's character that this show is quote-unquote critiquing? Who's to say that the audience isn't doing the exact same thing with that behavior as well? I can picture it now, young boys on the playground calling their peers babe and hotties, just because the funny Magic Man on Disney Channel did so. And that's really only the, pardon my pun, elementary. Okay, so I've been giving all these examples and saying all these things about how the character of Benny is an incel or whatever, problematic, all the words you want to use to describe something as bad. Thing bad is what I've been saying so far, right? Well, why? Why is it bad for a show to depict a guy having a weird relationship with women? It isn't, actually. There is no problem with that whatsoever. Many a show has done such a thing. I think of shows like Mad Men, for example. I mean, you probably could use the show How I Met Your Mother as an example as well, although I would argue the character of Barney Stinson, you're supposed to know that what he's doing is bad. It's not really questioned as like something that needs to be stopped. I mean, none of his friends, apparently the high and mighty Ted Mosby, thinks that all of this stuff is fine. So fine that he's even telling his children about it, right? Where I have a problem with it is where these shows throw up their hands and they claim satire.
Satire is the art of making someone or something look ridiculous, raising laughter in order to embarrass, humble, or discredit its targets.
Here's the thing about satire. I have been thinking about it way too in-depthly, specifically because I was in a class that was about major British writers, and we focused on the concept of the rise of the novel in the 18th century, and how a lot of the early novels of the time centered around young women, specifically. A great example is the novel Evelina, written by Frances Burney. It is a satire making fun of a lot of the marriage plot stories that were popular at the time, popularized by the first ever novel, possibly, Pamela, which has to be here somewhere. Where's Pamela? Right there. There it is. On the shelf. That's Pamela. Sadly, I don't have a copy of Evelina, even though I like Evelina and I despise Pamela. That's because I just forgot to buy it in time, and then I found a free copy online because it's in the public domain. So I just went with that. It's a shame though, because I actually quite like Evelina, and I would like to own a copy of it. But yes, it's an 18th century satire, and in my undergraduate college class, our professor posed the question of how, when we found out it was satire, because the professor did not lead the discussion of the novel with, hey, this is a satire, or even say that in like the reading list or anything. So when did we find out it was a satire, and how do we feel about how satire functions as a story element, right? And this is where I started spiraling, okay? Because at the exact same time that I was, reading this book and we were discussing satire as a class, FD Signifier, one of my favorite current creators, he published a video called like the Manosphere or the incels and the failures of satire or something like that. And he went into extreme depth talking about how satire has basically fallen on deaf ears when it comes to many a TV show and a movie. 2 of the 3 examples he used I had not seen, which was Attack on Titan and The Boys. But the final one, The Joker, is the one that I think is the most prescient. Basically, all of these series, I'll use The Joker as an example, was written as a satire. It's making fun of people like The Joker. And yet, all the people who love the movie and gave it all the money to make it like this huge success are the people who can relate to the Joker and see themselves in him and see that as good, positive representation of their lifestyle.
So satire is very context dependent. And it also depends on the audience recognizing it as such. For satire to be effective, it must be received as satire. There's always the risk that the satire will be read straight or superficially.
So in almost every sense of the word, satire failed. That was a failure to understand satire. And specifically what FD Signifier says in that video is that all of these leftists go, ha ha ha, you're wrong, you don't understand Fight Club or whatever, right? And then that does nothing. It does nothing but make the person saying such feel superior, which is why when I knew I was going to make a video about Weir, I couldn't just do that. I couldn't just say, see, your comfort character from when you were 12 is bad. Like, I couldn't just do that because it doesn't accomplish anything, right? I think the problem with satire, which is the same thing that FD says in that video, is that when it comes to a visual medium specifically, it is always going to fall on deaf ears because the visual medium of television and TV shows requires that you visualize the characters doing the thing. So because of that, it immediately can be removed from its context of the entire series, right? Especially online with edits and tweets and clips and all that stuff. So you can take a clip of the Joker baby saying some absolutely unhinged wild bullshit and put some aggro hyper pop over it, and all of a sudden it's this cool edgy thing that you're like, yeah, like that inspires me, that's what I want to get the power to be able to finally say those things, because that's what I'm thinking, right? It empowers people and it feels like good representation. So I was bringing all of this up in my class when we were talking about Evelina, and I said, but this book doesn't have that problem, I found. Like, it's so obviously... the only reason why you would not interpret it as a satire is because it's an ancient text from the 1700s, and so even having, to decipher that version of English can be difficult for a lot of people. So in that sense, I can understand why the professor asked, when did you figure out it was a satire? Because, you could just assume that all of the wacky, insane, crazy stuff that's happening in the novel as just what it was like in the 18th century, right? But when you have the historical context and you understand the language, it's very clearly making fun of books like Pamela, books that, prioritize women getting married at such a young age, and the absurdity of said marriage plots and all of the twists and turns and ups and downs and stuff. Evelina doesn't have this problem because it's a book. And the fact that it is written text, it makes it 10 times easier to parse through the fact that it's being satirical. Do I have my copy of The Women of Color up here? Oh, here it is. I do have it. Yay, I can show it now. The Woman of Color is another satirical novel from the time and has actually no definitive author. It is written by Anonymous. And this book is so insanely fascinating and interesting and well written that I can't speak any more on it because it deserves its own video, honestly. Someone please make a video about The Woman of Color. So satirical novels and written text specifically is a lot easier to parse through if done correctly, of course. This is all under the guise of if it's done properly. It is much easier to parse through and understand as satire because of the way language has to be, developed and understood, in my opinion, okay? And on top of all of this, when I said this in class, one of my classmates so adeptly said, also because the kind of people who would relate to these horrible characters who you're supposed to understand are being made fun of, they're not the type of people to read books. So yeah, fair enough. In Evelina specifically, there is like a group of men who are displaying basically all of the very, very similar behavior that characters like Benny and Zack portray in their shows. And they are bad, and the main character does not marry them. And it is much easier to understand their behavior as bad because of the way that they're described, like very specifically. I also have to clarify that the book Evelina is written as an epistolary novel, so specifically that means, for those of you who don't know, big scary book words, an epistolary novel means that it is a series of letters, so you're reading like letters that were sent to somebody and then like reading letters that were sent back to that person, right? It's like a lot of these stories, especially in the 18th century, because like the novel was so new at the time, it was novel, one could say, that they were like framed almost like you were reading actual letters in the real world that existed, right? Like they would always have some preface like, I dug these up, fake name here, dug these up in a vat in the middle of nowhere. It was buried in the sand and I'm now publishing it for you guys to read, right? Like there was always like that immersion tactic at play. And so because it is an epistolary novel and we're reading letters that Evelina is writing to somebody, we very, very clearly understand what Fanny Burney is trying to say with this type of man that existed at the time that she, I'm assuming, interacted with a lot, and which is why it is represented in her novel, which is that it's gross and weird and unwarranted and not a fun time. The novel isn't perfect, by the way. There are many things when it comes to class that you can analyze it and give criticisms of, but overall, it was what opened up my third eye when it came to satire, because another moment that opened up my fourth eye, I got four eyes now, what really enlightened me to the fact that like Mabav is supposed to be satire was a very, very obscure promotional clip that was like uploaded unlisted to fucking Vimeo, and I don't even know if it's on there anymore. It was a promotional video for the Mabav video game specifically, where they call the series a satire / spoof of horror movies and the horror genre. Which, to an intense degree, yes, it is. Okay, so that video actually doesn't specifically call Mabav a satire, but it does call it a spoof.
The hit Teletoon and Disney XD show, My Babysitter's a Vampire, is a special effects live-action comedy spoofing retro horror movies and the Twilight series.
The definition of spoof is honestly very similar to satire, but I'm not even going to get into that or unpack that. As far as I'm aware, Mabav is a satire, in my own personal opinion, since as far as I'm aware, there is no direct evidence that anyone who worked on the show called it a satire. Specifically, I would call Mabav a Manipian satire, and I'm just not going to get into that. If you guys want more discussions on satire in this channel, hit me up. Maybe I'll describe that more. Anyways, I was trying not to get too English major up in here, but you know what? I think I failed on that mission.
Finally, there's Manipian satire, reserved for prose works that still resemble that original connotation of satire as a miscellany or containing multitudes. While technically the life story of the eponymous narrator, the novel's far less interested in any kind of linear plot than it is in accumulating incidents and characters and materials that gently mock and comment on the absurdities of what was then modern life and love.
They're making fun of all of the tropey vampire stuff while still taking the character development and the arc of the story seriously. That's kind of why I've come to terms with like the Toilet Gator and the Vampire Ghost Car, which again in my first ever video on Mabav I criticized and said were not good. I've come to terms with them because I've understood that it's camp. okay? It's camp that the car is not only possessed, like that one movie, Clarissa, I think is what it's called, but it's also a ghost. You know, it's a ghost-possessed car that is a vampire. It's a vampire ghost car. Like, and then the original title of the episode was just Evil Car. Camp. What can I say? Same thing with the toilet gator. Is that supposed to be a Sharknado thing? Was Sharknado out at that time? I don't know. There is an element of analysis towards Mabav where it's not a satire at all, and it is genuinely, wholeheartedly trying to more pay tribute to this style of horror rather than make fun of in an endearing way, right? That's something that we could really, look into maybe one day. Next year. But overall, I like to call this a phenomenon of satire not coming through in visual media specifically, the Fight Club effect. Fight Club is another great example of a movie where people did not get that it's making fun of aggressively aggro men and saw themselves in it and decided to reclaim it as their own. But famously, Fight Club is adapted from a book, from a novel, which has all of that same satire baked within the loaf. And I don't see many people saying the same for Fight Club, the book, that it glorifies, aggressive men or anything like that, right? Because at the end of the day, when you have these insane lines of dialogue that are supposed to be not taken seriously, but you have peak Brad Pitt saying them, people are not going to be looking at the words, is all I'm saying. And then when it comes to the perspective of this being a kid's show, like Fight Club and The Joker are one thing, because those are rated R movies, right? Mabav is a PG show, and it aired on a kids network, on 2 different kids networks, both Teletoon, who made it, and Disney Channel, where it was the most popular. Leave a comment down below if you watched this series on Teletoon. I would love to know, because famously it bombed on Teletoon and was very successful on Disney Channel, which is why the show is so well remembered by Americans, by people from the United States, and not Canadians, even though it is a Canadian TV show. Yeah, it being a kids show changes the context, because immediately any sort of jokes that aren't the most obvious and surface level, for a large batch of people, it's gonna fly over their heads. And especially when it comes to children, because their brains are gooey and malleable and absorb information in a very interesting way, which is something that I really picked up on with The Play's the Thing. It can be argued that this satire is still doing the work of mainstreaming. And again, I say it can be argued. I'm not going to definitively say it is the case, because this is something that people have been debating for forever now, for a long, long time, when it comes to violent video games and rap music, all that stuff.
I blame video games.
Yeah, that and the rap music.
Nice.
So it's very possible that Benny Weir is the reason why we have Andrew Tate today. There's the clickbait title that I really wanted to put at the beginning of the video, but, because I have self-worth, I'm not going to. And also, I don't actually believe it, because Andrew Tate is his own monster and beast on its own. And same thing with this whole Manosphere incel culture. We can't just say it was TV that did it, okay? I'm not willing to put that out there, but it works for great clickbait, so that's why I did the advertising, okay? I think that's all. I feel really good about this. I was so concerned that I wasn't going to eloquently get my point across, and I probably didn't. I stumbled a lot. But without a script, because I'm trying to avoid copyright, and I'm trying to avoid using clips in my videos from now on, because famously, my original Mabav video, the one I'm stripping for parts, I have not seen a single cent of, because it has been copyright strikes to hell and back. So I will show the occasional clip on the screen, but, next to me and small, so the bots don't notice it, Luckily with Mabav, since it's so unwell remembered, the copyright holders don't feel the need to block the video worldwide, which reminds me of the most important thing that I might mention again in the video, but I'll mention now for those of you who made it here. If you are having a hard time finding this show, look up Ethan's upload channel on YouTube, okay? The entire series has been uploaded in HD on YouTube. Specifically the movie, I was able to find a copy of in HD. I feel pretty proud of myself for that. I didn't do much work to find it, but I found a copy of it in HD. So my friend of the channel, Anakin, aka your bro, on YouTube, uploaded it for all of you guys to see. So if you want to make your edits, your AMVs or whatever, with HD quality footage, you got it on YouTube, okay? Please, I'll link a playlist with the entire series in HD in the description below so you can watch it on your flat screen TV or whatever and have a good time, okay? Sadly, you can't control the ads, of course, because, you know, it's all been copyrighted, but at least they're allowing it to stay up on YouTube. With that, that's the end of this video, and I'll see you guys next week where we're going to talk about Rory. I'm going to hint at what character we're going to talk about next at the end of each of these videos. So, and if you guys want a compilation of this, let me know. I would love to know if people want like a, I don't know how long it would be, 4-hour video on Mabav in the same structure as my first one, but just with all of the new videos I've made now. Okay, well that's all. Like I said, thank you guys so much for watching. I'm so proud of what I've been able to do here, and I hope you guys all enjoy it. And I'll see you guys next time. Bye.
What?